Don't dance with him unless you're ready to change the fate of this entire kingdom. Emma Carter heard the whisper just seconds before she stepped onto the ballroom floor, but she had no idea who had said it, or why everyone suddenly seemed to be watching her. She was only a waitress, a temporary guest, a girl who had spent the afternoon serving coffee at a small diner and the evening counting every dollar she had left in her worn leather purse. The invitation in her hand had been meant for someone else, but the wealthy family hosting tonight's grand winter ball needed extra staff, and Emma had been told she could stay after her shift as long as she remained quiet. So she had tried to disappear into the crowd. The ballroom made that impossible. Crystal chandeliers glowed above polished marble floors. Soft music floated through the air. Men in tailored black suits and women in elegant gowns moved beneath golden light as if they belonged to another world. Emma knew she did not. Her simple midnight blue dress had cost $42 at a local department store. Everyone else seemed dressed in clothing worth more than her apartment. She kept her hands folded and her eyes lowered. Then she noticed the man standing alone beside the orchestra, Ethan Blackwood. He was younger than the other members of the family, with dark brown hair, pale skin, and a quiet expression that made him seem strangely distant even in a room filled with people. Guests passed him without speaking. Some glanced at him, then quickly looked away. Emma had seen loneliness before. She recognized it immediately. It looked like someone pretending they did not care whether anyone noticed them. The music changed. Couples began moving toward the dance floor. Ethan remained where he was. Emma hesitated. She remembered her grandmother once telling her that sometimes the kindest thing you could do was make someone feel seen. So she walked toward him. "Would you like to dance?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at her as if she had spoken a language no one had used with him in years. Then, slowly, he smiled. Around them, conversations faded. One by one, heads turned. Emma placed her hand in his and stepped onto the floor. She did not see the figure standing high above the ballroom. She did not see the man watching from the shadowed balcony. Alexander Blackwood, the Vampire King, had been observing the entire room in silence. His pale face remained unreadable, his silver-gray eyes fixed on the one human who had dared to approach his brother without fear, ambition, or hesitation. Then Ethan laughed. It was a small sound, almost forgotten. Alexander had not heard it in years. His expression changed, just slightly. "Who is she?" he asked. No one in the room dared answer. And for the first time that evening, the Vampire King stopped watching his brother and started watching Emma. Why is the king watching that human girl? The question passed quietly through the ballroom as Emma continued dancing with Ethan, unaware that hundreds of eyes had shifted toward her. The music moved gently around them, but Emma could feel something had changed. Only a few minutes earlier, she had been invisible among the guests. Now every movement seemed to matter. Ethan guided her carefully across the polished floor, his expression lighter than before. "I cannot remember the last time I enjoyed a dance," he admitted. Emma smiled. "Then I am glad you asked." Ethan gave a small laugh. "You asked me." Emma blinked, then laughed too. "Right. Then I am glad I asked." From the balcony above, Alexander heard every word. His silver-gray eyes remained fixed on them. He had spent decades watching people approach his family with carefully chosen smiles and hidden intentions. Tonight was different. Emma did not seem interested in wealth. She had not even looked toward the royal balcony until the whispers around her became impossible to ignore. She finally glanced upward. Their eyes met. The distance between them was nearly 40 feet, yet Emma felt as though the entire ballroom had disappeared. Alexander stood perfectly still beneath the soft golden light. His black suit seemed almost part of the shadows behind him. His expression revealed nothing, but his attention was unmistakable. Emma quickly looked away. "Was that him?" she whispered. Ethan followed her gaze and sighed. "Yes, my brother. The king." Ethan nodded. "Alexander Blackwood." Emma nearly missed her next step. "I did not know." Ethan smiled. "That may be why he is interested." Before Emma could answer, the music slowed. The dance ended, and polite applause moved through the ballroom. Ethan offered his hand and helped her step back from the floor. Then a servant approached and quietly told him that the king wished to speak with him. Ethan looked toward the balcony. Alexander was already gone. Emma released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "I should probably return to the staff area," she said. "Wait," Ethan replied. His expression suddenly became serious. "You should know something." Emma stopped. "What?" Ethan looked around the ballroom before lowering his voice. My brother does not watch people without a reason. A chill passed through Emma, but not from fear. She looked toward the staircase leading to the balcony. Empty. Did I do something wrong? Ethan shook his head. No, that is exactly what worries me. Before Emma could ask what he meant, the grand doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. A quiet hush spread across the guests. Alexander had returned. He walked down the staircase alone, each step calm and deliberate. Conversations disappeared one by one. Emma instinctively stepped back. The king stopped several feet from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Alexander looked at Ethan, then back at Emma. You made my brother smile, he said. His voice was calm, but the entire room seemed to listen. Emma swallowed. He seemed like he needed someone to dance with. Alexander studied her carefully. Most people would have asked what they could gain. Emma looked confused. I did not think about gaining anything. Something shifted in the king's expression. Almost imperceptibly, the coldness in his eyes softened. I believe you, he said. Then he turned toward the ballroom doors. Come with me, Miss Carter. There is something you need to see. Emma hesitated. She had no idea what waited beyond those doors. But as she followed the vampire king into the quiet corridor, she noticed one strange detail. Alexander was no longer watching her from above. He was walking beside her. You are the first human he has ever brought here. Emma stopped walking. The corridor beyond the ballroom was quiet, lined with tall windows that reflected the moonlight across the marble floor. Alexander stood several feet ahead of her, waiting without impatience. Emma looked around. Where exactly are we going? Somewhere my family rarely allows guests to enter, he answered. His voice was calm, almost distant. Ethan had disappeared back into the ballroom, leaving Emma alone with the most powerful man in the building. She tightened her fingers around the small purse hanging from her wrist. I am not really a guest. Alexander glanced at her simple dress. I know. There was no judgment in his words. Somehow, that made her more nervous. They continued down the corridor until Alexander stopped before a pair of tall wooden doors. He placed one hand against them, and they opened silently. Emma stepped inside and forgot to breathe for a moment. The room was a private library, nearly twice the size of her entire apartment. Shelves reached toward a vaulted ceiling. Thousands of books filled the walls, some bound in worn leather, others protected behind glass. A large window overlooked the gardens below. Moonlight rested across a long wooden table covered with old maps and carefully arranged documents. Emma looked at everything with open wonder. This is beautiful. Alexander watched her reaction. Most people ask how much everything is worth. Emma turned toward him. Why would I ask that? Because that is what people usually want to know. She smiled faintly. I already know I cannot afford any of it. For the first time, Alexander almost smiled. He walked toward the table and picked up a small silver-framed photograph. My brother used to spend hours in this room, he said, before he stopped speaking to most people. Emma looked at the photograph. It showed Ethan as a young man standing beside Alexander, both dressed in formal clothing from another era. Ethan looked happy. What happened? She asked. Alexander was silent for several seconds. Nothing happened all at once. Sometimes loneliness arrives one day at a time. The answer surprised her. The king placed the photograph back on the table. Ethan has refused every invitation to dance for 11 years. Emma looked at him. 11 years? Alexander nodded. Tonight, you were the first person he approached without being asked. Emma shook her head. I thought I was the one who asked him. Alexander's eyes settled on her. That is not what I mean. A strange quiet filled the room. Emma suddenly noticed something on the table. An old book lay open beneath a glass cover. Its pages were filled with faded symbols and handwritten notes. One symbol looked familiar. She leaned closer. I have seen that before. Alexander immediately looked at the page. Where? In my grandmother's things. His expression changed. Your grandmother? Emma nodded. She kept old books. She always said some stories were better left forgotten. Alexander stepped closer to the table, studying the symbol. For the first time that evening, the composure of the vampire king seemed uncertain. What did she call this mark? Emma thought for a moment. The returning star. Alexander went completely still. Outside, the wind moved through the gardens. Somewhere far away, the ballroom music began again. Alexander looked at Emma as though he were seeing her for the first time. Miss Carter, he said quietly, That symbol has been missing from my family records for more than 300 years. Emma stared at the page. Then why is it in my grandmother's book? Alexander did not answer. He simply closed the ancient volume and looked toward the library doors. Because, he said, I think your grandmother knew my family long before you were born. Because your grandmother knew my family long before you were born. The words remained in the air as Emma stared at Alexander, waiting for him to explain what he meant. He did not. Instead, he walked to the tall windows and looked toward the gardens, where moonlight rested over the hedges like silver mist. My grandmother never mentioned the Blackwoods, Emma said. She rarely talked about her past. Alexander turned back to her. What was her name? Eleanor Carter. The king's expression tightened with recognition. Eleanor. He said the name quietly, as if searching through centuries of memory. Then he crossed the room and opened a narrow cabinet built into the wall. Inside were dozens of carefully preserved letters. He selected one and brought it to the table. The paper was yellowed with age, but the handwriting remained clear. Emma leaned closer. She recognized it immediately. That is her handwriting. Alexander studied her face. You are certain? I would know it anywhere. He placed the letter beside the old book. The same symbol appeared at the bottom of the page. The returning star. Emma felt a strange warmth in her chest. What did she do for your family? Alexander hesitated. She saved my brother. Emma looked toward him. Ethan. Alexander nodded. Long before you were born, my brother suffered from a condition our physicians could not understand. He became withdrawn, unable to trust anyone outside our family. Your grandmother was one of the few humans who treated him like a person instead of a mystery. Emma smiled softly. That sounds like her. Alexander's gaze lowered to the letter. She stayed with him for 3 months. Why? Emma asked. Because she believed everyone deserved kindness, even when no one could explain why they needed it. Emma looked down at her hands. Suddenly, the dance in the ballroom felt different. She had thought she had simply noticed a lonely man. Perhaps kindness had found its way through her family for generations. Before she could speak, the library doors opened. Ethan entered, his expression unusually serious. Alexander. The king looked up. What happened? The council has heard about the symbol. Emma's heart sank. What does that mean? Ethan looked at her, then at his brother. They want to meet her. Alexander's answer came immediately. No, Ethan stepped closer. They are already gathering in the East Hall. Emma looked between them. Why would they care about me? Ethan lowered his voice. Because the returning star is not just a family symbol. He pointed toward the old book. It is connected to a promise made 300 years ago. Emma felt the room grow strangely quiet. What promise? Ethan looked at Alexander. The king remained silent for several seconds before finally answering. A promise that one day, a human woman carrying the mark would return to our family. Emma stared at him. And what happens when she returns? Alexander's eyes met hers. That is what no one has been able to determine. A distant bell rang through the castle. Once, twice, then a third time. Ethan glanced toward the door. They are calling the council. Alexander closed the book and stepped between Emma and the doorway, not threatening, but protective. Then they can wait. Emma looked at him. You cannot keep them away forever. No, Alexander said quietly. But tonight, I can choose what happens next. For a moment, the cold walls of the ancient library seemed less intimidating. Emma realized something had changed. She had entered the castle as a stranger. Now the king was standing beside her, protecting a mystery neither of them understood. And somewhere beyond those doors, an entire council was waiting to discover why the quiet human woman from the ballroom had awakened a secret buried for 3 centuries. Then they can wait. Alexander's words had barely faded when the bell sounded again, this time slower, deeper, carrying through every corridor of the castle. Emma looked toward the library doors. They are not going to wait, are they? Ethan gave a quiet sigh. Probably not. Alexander remained calm. The council may be patient with many things. They are rarely patient with mysteries. Emma glanced at the old book on the table. And I am the mystery. You are part of it, Alexander replied. That distinction matters. Before Emma could ask what he meant, footsteps approached from beyond the doors. Several servants entered first, followed by a tall woman wearing a dark emerald gown. Her silver hair was pinned neatly at the back of her head, and her expression was composed but intensely curious. Behind her came 3 elderly council members. each carrying the quiet authority of people who had advised the Blackwood family for generations. The woman stopped when she saw Emma. So this is the human. Alexander's voice remained steady. Her name is Emma Carter. The woman looked at him. You brought her into the private library. I did. Why? Alexander did not answer immediately. Emma noticed that Ethan had moved closer to his brother. The silence itself seemed to say enough. The woman turned toward Emma. Miss Carter, do you know what the symbol on that book represents? Emma shook her head. I only know that my grandmother called it the returning star. The council members exchanged glances. The woman stepped toward the table. Your grandmother used that name? Yes. Did she ever tell you why? No, Emma paused. She only told me that some promises survive longer than people. The room became completely still. Alexander looked at Emma with renewed interest. That phrase was written in the original family record, he said. Exactly the same way. Emma frowned. I have never seen your family record. I know. One of the council members opened the old book and carefully turned several pages. Beneath a faded illustration of a silver star was a handwritten sentence. He read it quietly. When the forgotten promise returns, the house must recognize her by the kindness she gives before she knows what she has been given. Emma stared at the words. That sounds like a riddle. The woman in emerald nodded. It is. Ethan looked at Emma. And tonight, you gave kindness before anyone asked you to. Emma thought of the ballroom. She had not known Ethan was royalty. She had not known Alexander was watching. She had simply seen someone standing alone. The realization made her uneasy. Are you saying my grandmother knew this would happen? No, Alexander answered. We are saying she may have believed it could. The councilwoman looked toward the king. There is another matter. Alexander's expression became more serious. What matter? The records say the returning star appears only when the royal family has reached a turning point. Ethan looked confused. What kind of turning point? The woman did not answer him. She looked directly at Emma. A choice between remaining as we are and becoming something different. Emma felt the weight of the words. She had arrived at the castle expecting nothing more than an unusual evening. Now everyone seemed to believe her presence. Carried meaning she did not understand. Alexander noticed her uncertainty. You do not owe this family anything, he said. The councilwoman looked surprised. Ethan looked relieved. Emma looked at Alexander. Then why did you bring me here? He held her gaze. Because I wanted to know whether the woman who made my brother smile was simply kind. He paused. Or whether kindness itself was the reason you were brought to us. Emma did not know how to answer. Then, from somewhere inside the ancient library, a faint sound echoed. The old book had opened by itself. Every person in the room turned toward it. A single page had fallen open beneath the moonlight. At the center was the same silver star. And beneath it, for the first time, new words were appearing. The words are changing. Emma's voice was barely a whisper, but everyone in the library heard her. Beneath the silver star, fresh letters slowly appeared across the ancient page, as though an invisible hand were writing them one at a time. Alexander stepped closer, but he did not touch the book. Read it, he said. Emma leaned over the table. The message was written in the same elegant script as the older records. When the house forgets what kindness means, the stranger shall remind it. Ethan looked at his brother. That is not in the original record. The councilwoman shook her head. No, it is not. Another line appeared beneath it. She will enter without seeking power, and the king will recognize her before he understands why. Emma slowly looked up. The king. No one answered. Her eyes moved toward Alexander. He remained perfectly still. The realization was almost too simple. It means you, Emma said. Alexander gave a quiet nod. It appears so. The council members began speaking softly among themselves, but Emma barely heard them. She was thinking about the ballroom, about Ethan standing alone, and about the moment Alexander had looked down from the balcony. You recognized me before tonight? She asked. Alexander's eyes met hers. Not you personally. He paused. But the feeling. Emma frowned. What feeling? That something had changed. His answer was so honest that she did not know what to say. Ethan stepped toward the table and studied the new writing. There is more. Another sentence appeared. The brother shall open the door. The human shall choose whether to enter. Emma felt a chill move through her. So Ethan was the one who brought me into this. Ethan shook his head. I did not know. I know, Emma said gently. You just wanted someone to dance with. Ethan smiled. And you said yes. Alexander watched the exchange in silence. Then the book changed again. A final line appeared. The choice must be made before midnight. The room fell quiet. Emma looked toward the tall windows. The moon had moved higher into the sky. She could hear the distant clock beginning to count the final minutes before midnight. The councilwoman turned toward Alexander. The old promise is asking for a decision. Then she will make her own, Alexander replied. Emma looked at him. What decision? He approached the table and carefully closed the book. Whether you want to leave this castle tonight and forget everything you have seen, or stay long enough to learn why your grandmother was connected to my family. Emma thought about the small apartment waiting for her, the early shift at the diner tomorrow, and the ordinary life she had always believed was all she would ever have. Then she looked at Ethan, who was watching her with quiet hope. Finally, she looked at Alexander. The king did not pressure her. He simply waited. That mattered more than she expected. If I stay, Emma asked, will you tell me the truth? Alexander answered immediately. Whatever I know, even if it changes everything, especially then. Emma took a slow breath. Then I will stay. Ethan smiled. The council members exchanged uncertain looks. Alexander's expression softened. But before anyone could speak, the old book opened again. A new symbol appeared beneath the silver star. This time, it was not a star at all. It was the outline of a door. And somewhere deep within the castle, a lock turned. There is a door beneath this castle that has not opened in 300 years. Ethan's words made Emma look toward the library floor. The faint sound of the turning lock had stopped, but the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Alexander walked toward the far wall, where an enormous painting showed the Blackwood family standing beneath an ancient castle tower. He studied the painting for a moment, then reached behind its wooden frame. A hidden mechanism clicked. The entire panel shifted slightly, revealing a narrow stone passage beyond it. Emma stared. You knew this was here? I knew there was a sealed passage, Alexander replied. I did not know what would open it. Ethan looked at the symbol in the old book. The returning star. Alexander nodded. Apparently. Emma stepped toward the passage, but Alexander raised one hand. Stay beside me. His tone was protective, not commanding. She nodded. The three of them entered the hidden corridor. Unlike the elegant halls above, this passage was untouched by modern decoration. Ancient stone walls stretched into darkness, illuminated by small blue lights that appeared as they moved forward. Emma heard the soft echo of their footsteps. How old is this part of the castle? She asked. Older than the kingdom, Alexander answered. Older than my family. They continued for nearly 200 yards before reaching a circular chamber. At its center stood a tall stone door covered with the same silver star Emma had seen in the library. But beneath the star was something new. A small handprint. Emma stared at it. That is my size. Ethan looked at Alexander. Do not tell me. Alexander remained silent. Emma stepped closer. What happens if I touch it? We do not know, Alexander said. Then we should find out. She placed her palm against the stone. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then the silver star began to glow softly. A warm light traveled beneath the carved lines, spreading across the entire door. Ethan took a quiet breath. Alexander watched Emma carefully, ready to step forward if she became uncomfortable, but she remained calm. The door opened without a sound. Beyond it was a small chamber filled with old portraits, letters, and objects preserved behind clear glass. Emma's attention immediately went to one portrait on the far wall. A young woman stood beside a much younger Alexander. Emma stopped. That is my grandmother. Alexander moved closer. His expression changed completely. Eleanor. The portrait showed Eleanor Carter smiling beside Alexander, both standing in the same castle garden that Emma had seen from the library window. Beneath the painting was a simple inscription. To the king who forgot how to trust, from the human who reminded him. Emma turned toward Alexander. You knew her. He looked at the portrait for a long moment. She was one of the most important people my family ever knew. Then why did she never tell me? Perhaps she wanted you to choose your own life. Emma looked back at the portrait. And now I am here because of her. Alexander shook his head. No, you are here because you chose to dance with my brother. Emma smiled faintly. That sounds almost ordinary. It was, Alexander said. That is what makes it extraordinary. Ethan walked toward a small glass case near the center of the room. Inside was an old silver pendant shaped like a star. A handwritten note rested beneath it. He read the first line aloud. For the granddaughter who arrives when the house needs kindness again. Emma's smile disappeared. She looked at Alexander. She expected me. Before he could answer, another line appeared on the note. And when she comes, the king must choose whether to protect the old promise or let the human choose her own destiny. Alexander stared at the words. Emma looked at him. For the first time, the ancient mystery was no longer only about her grandmother. It was asking something of him. And somewhere above them, the castle clock began to strike midnight. The choice was never meant to be made by the prophecy. It was meant to be made by the king. Emma's words lingered in the hidden chamber as the final bell faded above them. Alexander stood beneath the old portrait of Eleanor Carter, his pale face unreadable, while Ethan remained beside the glass case containing the silver pendant. For 300 years, the Blackwood family had guarded this secret, yet tonight it had led directly to Emma. What exactly did my grandmother expect you to do? Emma asked. Alexander looked at the note again. She expected me to remember something I had forgotten. What? He turned toward her. That a promise is not an order. Emma studied him carefully. Then what is it? A promise is a responsibility. But responsibility does not give me the right to decide your future. Ethan smiled quietly. That sounds like something Eleanor would have said. Alexander almost smiled. She said it often. Emma stepped closer to the portrait. Tell me about her. Alexander was silent for a moment, then began. She came here many years ago when my brother was struggling to trust anyone. She did not care that we were powerful. She did not fear our reputation. She simply listened. Emma looked at Ethan. Just like tonight. Ethan nodded. Just like tonight. A soft glow suddenly appeared inside the glass case. The silver pendant lifted slightly from its velvet cushion, surrounded by a warm golden light. Emma stared at it. Alexander did not move. It is responding to you, Ethan whispered. Emma reached toward the glass, but stopped before touching it. Should I? Alexander looked at her. Only if you want to. She opened the case and carefully lifted the pendant. The moment it rested in her palm, the light spread across the chamber. Another hidden inscription appeared on the wall beneath Eleanor's portrait. Emma read it aloud. The one who enters without seeking a crown shall reveal the heart of the king. Ethan looked at Alexander. The king said nothing. Emma lowered the pendant. That sounds less like a prophecy and more like a test. Alexander nodded. Perhaps it is. And who is being tested? He looked directly at her. Both of us. Emma felt the weight of the moment, but there was no fear in it. She had spent most of her life believing that powerful people made decisions and ordinary people simply accepted them. Alexander was offering her something she had rarely received. A choice. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. The council had followed them. The emerald-dressed woman appeared in the doorway, followed by the other council members. Her eyes immediately went to the glowing pendant in Emma's hand. It has awakened, she said. Alexander stepped forward. And that does not change. Her freedom. The woman looked at him. You know what this means. I know what it does not mean. His voice remained calm. It does not mean she belongs to this family. It does not mean she owes us anything. It does not mean the council gets to decide her life. Emma stared at him. For the first time, she understood what Eleanor had meant. The old promise was not about claiming a human. It was about whether the vampire king could protect someone without trying to control her destiny. The councilwoman slowly lowered her gaze. Then the choice is yours, your majesty. Alexander turned to Emma. No, he said softly. The choice is hers. Emma looked at the pendant glowing in her hand, then at the ancient portrait of her grandmother, and finally at the man who had watched her from above only hours earlier. She had entered the castle by accident. She had stayed because she wanted the truth. Now she understood that the truth was asking her to choose what happened next. Then I choose to stay. Emma's voice was quiet, but the hidden chamber seemed to hear every word. The silver pendant continued to glow softly in her hand, casting warm light across the old portrait of Eleanor Carter. Alexander looked at her for several seconds before giving a single nod. Then you will stay by your own choice, he said. And no one will take that choice from you. The councilwoman stepped forward. If she stays, she must understand that the Blackwood family carries responsibilities far beyond this castle. Emma looked at her. Then tell me the truth. The woman exchanged a glance with the other council members before speaking. 300 years ago, Eleanor Carter discovered that the Blackwood family was slowly losing its connection to the human world. She believed the answer was not greater power, but greater understanding. She formed a friendship with the family and left behind the returning star as a reminder. Emma looked at the pendant. And now it has returned. Yes, the woman said. But no one knew when it would happen, or who would carry it. Ethan smiled softly. Apparently, the answer was a waitress who simply wanted to make sure someone did not spend the evening alone. Emma laughed quietly. That sounds much less mysterious. Alexander looked at his brother. Perhaps that is the point. The tension in the chamber finally began to fade. The council members stepped back, accepting that the decision had been made. But Emma was not finished. She turned toward Alexander. There is something I still do not understand. What is it? Why were you watching me from the balcony? Ethan smiled as though he already knew the answer. Alexander glanced toward the old portrait before looking back at Emma. At first, because I was curious. And after that, the king paused. Because you reminded me of Eleanor. Emma looked surprised. She was that kind. She was, Alexander said. But that was not what reminded me of her. Emma waited. She saw people before she saw their titles, he continued. Tonight, you did the same thing with Ethan. You saw a lonely man before you saw the king's brother. Emma looked toward Ethan, who gave her a grateful smile. Then I guess I learned that from her without even knowing it. Alexander nodded. Perhaps. The castle clock began to strike 12 again, marking the end of the night and the beginning of something none of them could predict. The pendant's light slowly faded until it became an ordinary silver star resting in Emma's palm. She expected the mystery to end there. Instead, the ancient door behind them opened farther, revealing another room beyond it. On the wall stood a large painting covered by a dark velvet cloth. Ethan approached it and gently pulled the cloth away. Emma stared. The painting showed Eleanor Carter standing beside Alexander, exactly as the portrait had shown them years before. But this painting was different. At the bottom was a newly revealed inscription. When the granddaughter returns, the king will no longer stand above the human world. He will stand beside her. Emma slowly turned toward Alexander. He looked at the painting, then at her. For the first time that night, the vampire king seemed less like a ruler and more like a man faced with a choice of his own. Your grandmother knew me well, he said quietly. Emma smiled. Maybe she knew you better than you knew yourself. Ethan laughed softly. Even the councilwoman allowed herself a small smile. Outside, the first light of dawn began to touch the distant horizon. Emma had arrived at the castle as a temporary guest, expecting nothing more than an unusual evening. She would leave the hidden chamber with a secret, a pendant, and a connection to a family older than the town she called home. Alexander walked beside her as they returned toward the main hall. He no longer watched her from a distant balcony. He no longer stood above her world. He walked beside her, exactly as the old promise had foretold. And Emma finally understood the quiet truth Eleanor had left behind. Sometimes destiny does not arrive with thunder or crowns. Sometimes it begins with one ordinary act of kindness, offered to someone who simply needed a dance.